Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. At this time, the meeting of the Special Legislative Commission to study and review regulation of drones and unmanned aerial vehicles will now come to order. I'd ask you to take the roll, please.
Chair Ucci.
Present.
Chair Corvesi.
Present.
Rep. Kazarian.
Present.
Ms. Lindbeck.
Present.
Mr. Facenti. Mr. McMahon.
Present.
Mr. Andrade.
Present.
Mr. Pappas.
Present.
Professor Leach.
Present.
Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon, which will be the final meeting of our commission. I want to thank everyone for their participation as we've gone along. Today's the day we're opening everything up to the public. And we've had some subject matter experts and people who have been involved in the field for many years come forward over the last few meetings. And today we'll elicit the opinions of the public. Now, we've all gotten emails and letters from folks who are here and those who could not make it, and that will all be put as part of the record. We have, after this, we will assemble a report, and that report will be published, and from there we anticipate some legislation will come out of this, as well as looking at other legislation that's been put in by other members of the General Assembly. So at this time, there was a sign-in sheet, so if anyone hasn't signed in, they can sign up to the next sheet, but I'll go through the one that's here already. So I would ask Joanne Massaroni from Narragansett Bay Commission to come forward. Joanne, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Oh, it's up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. My name is Joanne Massaroni. I'm the Government Affairs Manager for the Narragansett Bay Commission. First, we'd like to commend the members of the Commission for taking on this task of looking at regulating drones. It's a new area, and it is an area of concern, and we're very happy that you're looking into it. As some of you may know, the Narragansett Bay Commission owns and operates the two largest wastewater treatment facilities in the state. Our Fields Point facility is located in Providence, right at the Port of Providence, and our Buckland Point facility is located in the Rumford section of East Providence. We would ask the committee, when they consider areas of prohibiting operations of drones, we would ask the Commission to consider including wastewater treatment facilities in that prohibited area. And we've got specific language, as you'll see in my letter, anything owned or controlled by wastewater treatment facilities. And the reason we feel this way is we feel that drones can pose a confidentiality risk, not only to the NBC, but all wastewater treatment facilities. The zoom lens on cameras that are attached to drones can take videos and photos of up to 1,000 feet away. This function could enable the drones to view operations and technologies at our facilities over which we may have a lease, we may have a confidentiality agreement, as we do with our wind turbines. So we're concerned about that. We're concerned that the drones can monitor our daily operations, and they can see when hazardous chemicals are delivered to the plant and may try to sabotage the plant in that way. Drones also, it's my understanding, have the ability to drop payloads. And so a drone could drop some material into one of our tanks and totally disrupt our treatment process and therefore put the public health at risk. And last but not least, at our Fields Point treatment facility, we have 3 wind turbines. And if the drones get too close to them, they could cause damage. I mean, they could crash right into it. So we do have concerns. We'd appreciate your consideration of these concerns, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Joanne. Does anyone have any questions? No? Well, we have your testimony.
Yes.
Your written testimony. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would just ask that, I know a lot of people, there's people here who I haven't heard testify before, but we're going to try to limit everyone to no more than 5 minutes of testimony. And for those who've never testified before, 5 minutes may seem like a short amount of time, but speaking nonstop for 5 minutes is actually quite a bit of time. So I just ask you police yourselves as we go along. Next, I will ask Stephen Rosario from the American Chemistry Council to come forward. Thank you, Mr. Rosario.
Thank you, Chairman Uchi, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Stephen Rosario. I am Senior Director with the American Chemistry Council. We are a national organization. I handle issues for the Northeast. I've been representing the chemical industry for 25 years, coming to Rhode Island on many, many occasions. Providence is one of my favorite cities. I really enjoy coming here. First, I want to commend you and the Commission for the work that you are doing. This is an extremely new and difficult area to be dealing with. And you are to be commended because you are really studying this. There are so many moving parts to all of this, and by studying all these moving parts, I think if you go back to when you were shopping for Christmas, I know when I was shopping, just about every store I went into that sold toys or sports equipment had drones. So it is not only recreational, but in our industry, we actually use it in our operations. Sometimes to, I thought I had it correct. Sometimes to just look at our facilities and what is going on. So who are we? We are a $1.3 billion industry, the third largest manufacturing sector here in Rhode Island. You could see the numbers of jobs we generate, but more importantly, for every job we generate, rule of thumb, according to my economist, is about 2.3 additional jobs. And we are manufacturing, and we deal with some very hazardous materials. You heard the previous speaker. And what is important to us is not only the safety of our facilities, but the safety of our employees. And obviously, many of our facilities are located in your communities. So we are always concerned about the community around us because we involve communities in what we do. We oftentimes invite them into our facilities because people don't know what we do. But we also understand the importance that unmanned aerial vehicles or drones play not only on the recreational side, law enforcement side, security side. What is paramount to us is the security of what we call critical infrastructure facilities. And because of what we do, there is no question we are targets. And our industry has spent billions of dollars since 9/11 to fortify and refortify many of our facilities. If you were ever to come into one of our facilities, one of the very first things you have to do, and I've done it many times, you have to watch a video or sit for 15 minutes with one of our security and safety people. That's how seriously we take it. We've worked in 11 states, and we look forward to working with the Commission. We hope you will see us as a resource for information on this particular issue. Again, you're to be commended for the work you're doing, and it's a pleasure to be here this afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Rosario. Are there any questions from the Commission? No? Mr. Rosario, I noticed in your testimony that you've gotten 5 pieces of legislation passed. If you could email those to us, or just the names of the states where you've had them passed, that would be great, just for the record, so we can take a look at them.
In those states that we have worked in, we have provided some language to address our issues, and we'll include that as well, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next, we'll hear from Andy Argenio from the Academy of Model Aeronautics.
My name is Andrew Argenio. I live at 3 Shield Lane in Smithfield, Rhode Island. I'm an executive board member of the Academy of Model Aeronautics, and I also am a district vice president for the New England area. I want to thank Chairman Uchi and the members of the commission for giving me an opportunity to speak here today. I was going to speak on the bills, but I know that in the 3 or 4 minutes that we've got, that's going to be difficult. So essentially, I'm going to say that the paperwork that I gave you talked about those reasons and all the reasons that we felt because of our community and how we've operated these many years very successfully. We use risk mitigation, and we use techniques that aren't used by the community outside us. So in considering your laws and regulations and how you want to approach this, I think that you have to distinguish that you're looking at public laws, you're looking at civil laws, and you're also looking at the recreational group. And the recreational group is divided really into 2 categories: the community-based category and those that are the recreational flyers outside of our organization. Our organization is started back in 1936. We've been around for 80 years. I'm the oldest member on the board now. I head up the Advanced Flight Systems Committee, which is a committee that looks at any of the new technologies, mitigates those risks for those new technologies, and finds out ways that we can utilize it in our safety programming and in our insurance programming. I feel that I have to make one statement here, too, that I think is very important. All of you legislators have been tasked with a very difficult burden, and that burden, in certain ways, has been overemphasized by reports by the FAA. The FAA incident reports that went out there, the 764-some incidents, we took those incident reports, we did a study on them. I'd be willing to give you the results of that study. We reduced those 764 incidents down to 27 that actually could be considered near misses. And amongst those, almost half of those were military. Many of them that were flying at high altitude. They weren't even part of our organization. Some were balloons that had been showing up. The end result is, someone might ask me, well, why would the FAA do that? Well, they did that to influence public perception. Part of that reasoning behind doing that was to get the registration rule in place that they just recently put out so that we would register. They were frightened because we were heading towards Christmas. 400,000 drones out there, another 500,000 coming on, 1 million drones being flown. So, in order for them to put an interim rule in to avoid going through the Administrative Procedure Act and following the proper protocol for the NPRM, they used an emergency situation. That emergency situation and the publications and publicity that went out by the media left all of you in shock. And this is happening to us all around the country. We have people like myself, there's 11 of us, and we see it, a lot of legislation coming out. I'm asking that you very carefully consider what you're doing. I know the board here understands that. You have great people up here, but I hope you don't have a reaction to all of this media that is overemphasized, and I can provide you with that information. The distinction that we're seeking for ourselves, and I'm going to jump to that so I don't go into the bill itself because I've done that, is we would like you to provide one of 2 things for the community-based type organizations. One is if a law preempts any provisions of this bill, that provision, a federal law I should say, that provision will not apply. You may want to put that in if in fact, and I say that because under the FAA regulations, we're exempt because of our community-based organization. The other option is you can directly address us by saying nothing in this bill may be construed to apply to model aircraft as defined in Section 336C of the Modernization and Transportation Act, or that new act, which I know right now we've been in contact with them, was finalized in the House already. It's about to go into the Senate, and we're still going to be where we were in terms of 336. Now I'll have to remember a 6-digit number, and I'm not remembering what it is right now. I think it's 4455. But whatever it is, it gives us that same capability to operate under our own standards and our own safety protocol. This is an evolutionary technology. It's moving extremely fast. I know I'm almost up in time, so I'll just end it to let you know that many of the fears that you have in terms of the regulations, I'm an engineer. I head up that committee. We have a number of engineers on it. I'm working on right now an ADS-B system. I talked about that last year. Recently, in the testimony that was made in federal back in October, where you may have seen it on TV, one of the PhDs was on there, and he talked about, they asked him a question. They said, what can we do to reduce the risk factors in the national airspace? And he said, well, they asked him about an ADS-B system. He said, well, that's about 4 years away. It's going to cost $400, and we don't know we're going to get to it. Well, in December, I tested a unit. It's here already. It weighs not 4 pounds like he said. not 4 ounces. It weighs 4 grams. It mounts inside a model aircraft. It functions with the current ADS-B system. It's ready for production. It will not cost $500. We just tested the proof of concept units. They're manufactured. And this is not only one company doing it. That system will cost $30. So as legislators, some of the technologies that we have the ability to integrate into these systems are going to be out there correcting the same regulations that you're writing to try to create this, to reduce the risk factor. Here's what you'll get if you're not an AMA member. If you're not a non-AMA member, you'll get 1 page from the FAA, and it'll say 12 items on it. The first item says, follow a community-based organization. They tell you to go to the AMA. The last item says, do not conduct surveillance. Go to the AMA's privacy rules. I wrote them. Go to them. They're good. So now that's their book. So it's one of those things like in the movie, them, this is us. It's not 1 page like most people think of guidance. It's a whole book of many years of writing and mitigating and monitoring all the rules and the regulations. So I won't go further. If you have questions, if you ever need my assistance in terms of any of this, I'm working closely with the FAA, the key people, and I'll be willing to help. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Argenio. Are there any questions? Yes, Mr. McMahon.
I know we're pressed for time here, Mr. Argenio, but could you just briefly tell us what your oppositions are to the current legislation before the Rhode Island legislature?
Okay. Well, let's look at it quickly. And the first area I'll look at, and I'll just try to hit the areas that of concern. One of the things that happened as a result of all this media is that the FAA turned around and they sent you out a document. You should have received it on December 17th. That document dealt with their preemptive rights. So under the first portion of one of the bills, and I just combined them together, the one that deals with exclusivity, I think that they're possibly going to make an attempt to invoke the doctrine of implied preemption. And I say that to you because I just did a hearing in Concord, and the FAA has never done this. They called me up and they said, Mr. Argenio, if you need our counsel to help there, because they wanted to set a 100-foot ceiling and compress our level down, they said they were going to take up the challenge. So if I was sitting on your side, I'm not sure how I would address this. I think you need to contact that counsel. I have asked who the best people are there. I'm going to get that information back from my people, and I can let you know who the best people are to address. So that would be one area. In terms of registration, they're hitting you hard on that, and they specifically said that they do not want you to take on the responsibility of registering. One of those reasons, again, goes back to their preemptive power, and they also mentioned in there that no state or local government may impose an additional registration requirement on the operation of UAS in navigable airspace, but they do say this, without obtaining FAA approval. Contact them. Let me know how you make out, and how you make out will allow me to make a determination which way I can go with our community. In terms of prohibiting areas of where you want to operate, I would say this to you. Most of the states take on that role of wanting to prohibit things. I take on the role of saying it this way: must have permission. If you ask for permission, then at least you can look at it on a case-by-case basis. Because here's the reason. I conduct events all over the country, and we have them right here in New England. We do a beautiful event up in Sanford, Maine. I bring in 25,000 people to that event. It's a benefit for the economy as well up there. I do that because what do? We fly, and I was talking to Alan about it. He was a graduate of Emory-Riddle. We fly a full-scale airplane, an Emory-Riddle aircraft, flown by Matt Chapman, right along with one of our models on the same aircraft. So we do this because we're already partnered with them. So that's why we're afraid that if you pass rules that prevent everything and you don't do it on a case-by-case basis, you could destroy our capability, the responsible, the safe flyers from still being able to continue their work. So that's how I see airports and those other areas you may want to prohibit. In terms of the schools, you'd be crazy to prohibit it at the schools. We have Cranston West. I do the judging there for their robotics program. Ed Spidell is a tremendous teacher. His classes have been held on aerobatics for years. Aerobatics, I should say. And so he uses the same principles. Autopilots, GPS, inertial measurement units, they're all the same kind of stuff. So we'd like to have you at least allow the schools to be able to use the features of asking for permission, giving permission to people to be able to operate in those locations. So with regard to schools and colleges, it's important. University of Rhode Island, I know we have a professor here from University. Here he is right over there, and I'm a friend of Mr. Tyson, so I'll tell him you're doing a good job. But in terms of URI, I did the events there for years, 25 years, the Balloon Fest, and that school, we had property, we flew right off your property, the back and on the Peckham Field. They just invented an item for detection at airports so that they'll know when there's devices there. There's a number of them around, and so that's part of the process, and those are the kinds of good things we're going to see. That's a ground-based system that'll tell who's flying, where they're flying, and what's going on. Our systems will mitigate low-altitude tracking and avoidance using cellular networks and other devices, and above that, we have systems now that'll work above 500 feet. The ADS-B will go off only when you exceed a certain altitude, so it doesn't crowd the band. I can help explain that. If anyone doesn't know it, I'm certain this guy can too. So that's how we feel with the schools. STEM programs are important. We've got more of our people now working and just volunteering time because we realize the importance of this. Listen, when you're my age and you still got a passion, there's got to be something about the hobby that's good. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any
Are there
more questions?
any more
I'm
questions?
sorry,
Thank you very much, Mr.
All right.
Argenio. We'll be in touch. Thank
all
you.
right, thank you.
Hillary Davis from the ACLU.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the Commission. My name is Hillary Davis, and I'm the Policy Associate for the American Civil Liberties Union of Rhode Island. And as many of you may know, we're an organization that's very concerned with privacy rights, both privately and in terms of government intrusion on privacy. So I really want to thank this Commission for taking the opportunity to really put a lot of thought into what we're going to be doing in terms of drones statewide. This is something we've been talking about for a while. We're certainly seeing that they are here and they are in use. And so we are happy to see that Rhode Island is attempting to deal with these situations before they arise, before they become a much bigger problem. You've already heard considerable talk about some of the privacy implications of drones and, of course, of their significant technology. But one of the things I think that Rhode Island would be remiss if we did not address here in the next year is limiting law enforcement use of drones. And I want to make clear that I'm not talking about prohibiting drone use. I'm not talking about making it unduly difficult for law enforcement to use drones. What I am talking about is statutes restricting their use to make sure that they're being used appropriately. One of the things that we have seen nationwide is that municipalities get drones, they use them in a way that angers the community, then the community is stuck trying to go back and fix the problem. We would like to fix the problem before it is a problem. Our understanding is that there aren't drones in use by law enforcement quite yet, but as they get cheaper and more technologically advanced, we certainly believe the incentives are there to have them arise in the next few years. I have included in my written testimony a copy of a bill that has been before the General Assembly a couple of times over the last few years that does exactly what I'm hoping this commission will do. It essentially places a warrant requirement on the use of a drone, except in certain circumstances, and those certain circumstances do include risks of physical injury, immediate death, and the like, those emergency situations, and some other exemptions. The bill that's in front of you also talks about when the data is captured, how long it's kept, and in what situations their use is appropriate. And it's really just meant to make sure that we all know from the get-go that drones are not being used inappropriately in Rhode Island by law enforcement. With that, we're happy to work with the Commission and anybody else on a final version of this bill. We hope that this language will be incorporated into your final legislation, and I can answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Are there any questions? Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hillary, what I'm curious to know, and I'm not putting you on the spot here because I don't know if you guys have the data too, but you know, at first blush, law enforcement use of a drone seems similar to law enforcement use of a helicopter. But then very quickly you can understand, you know, the scenarios why it could be very different, right? So, and you don't need a warrant to use a police helicopter, generally speaking, right? You can fly around. But what are there any best practices or standards maybe that have been put in place by police departments that either are using drones or have thought about using drones that may not involve a warrant requirement, that basically maybe there's a flight ceiling or something that
Sure.
they
So
would
I'm
follow?
not aware of a flight ceiling or any sort of agreed upon, and I may be incorrect. One of the reasons why you don't necessarily need a warrant when you're talking about a helicopter is because there's a natural barrier on the use of a helicopter. It's very expensive, it takes time, and they can only stay up for a certain amount of time. So it's a very discrete period of time that you could be flying over a certain area. With a drone, a lot of those natural barriers disappear. So you could have a drone that instead of staying up in the air for a few hours and then needing to be refueled, could eventually stay up in the air all day, what have you. I can tell you that legislation similar to what is in front of you has passed in at least 17 states. So a lot of states are starting to do it in this way. I'm not sure of any other law enforcement best practices. Joe might actually know better than I would.
I was just curious because I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, the big difference isn't so much the duration, it's how it operates, right? So, I could be on a FLIR camera from a far distance from a helicopter and still be visible. It really doesn't matter how long it's up there, right? It's visible. But if the helicopter gets really close or is there at night, I'm going to know. I may not know with a drone,
Exactly.
right? So whether or not it has to go back and refuel, really, it's more how it operates. So I get that there's a difference, but I'm just curious to see how departments that are using drones have encountered this.
Yeah, there's been agreements and things like they probably shouldn't be weaponized. I think we can all agree with that one. But outside of that, I'm not sure. Like you say, with drones, you're talking about very high-powered cameras, you're talking about GPS, you're talking about the potential for heat-seeking. And so, we feel that the potential for an intrusion on liberty is so great that we just need to go ahead and deal with this now.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? No?
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Andy Trench from Exact Sense. Welcome.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to comment here today. My name is Andy Trench. I have been an AMA member and a responsible remote control aircraft pilot for over 15 years. I am confident that we'll continue to see exponential growth both commercially and privately of this extremely useful, quickly emerging technology. I'm the founder of a UAV mapping, laser scanning, and surveying company based here in Rhode Island. We've built UAV platforms that range from 2 inches wide to 7 feet wide. We have participated in UAV conferences and trade shows across the country, and I am a speaker and panelist on the subject at many of these conferences. I know firsthand the value of a UAV system for mapping land that is difficult to access, replacing dangerous manned cell phone and power line inspection, finding pipeline gas and chemical leaks, gathering high-quality video from perspectives normally seen from marine aircraft, monitoring coastal erosion, and even saving lives in disaster scenarios. And this is just to name a few, and I'm sure you've heard of the gamut of uses for the UAV. But I hope that Rhode Island will take this opportunity to not only accept but embrace this technology and allow its benefits to flourish, but most importantly, to attract and keep high-tech jobs in the state. With so much innovation to be made in this space, utilizing the creative and tech-savvy talent so present in the state that may otherwise leave for greener pastures is crucial. I would personally like to continue to grow our company in Rhode Island, knowing we had the support of its state leaders, and we simply could not do this in a UAV hostile environment. It is in my opinion that this spring of 2016 will actually be the dawn of the commercial UAV era, and there is so much more to gain using this technology than there is to fear. Over-regulating the technology now before seeing its full potential and understanding its value would be a huge mistake. Myself and many more are confident, like my friend Andy behind me, that with the proper education and care, the risks of the new technology can be mitigated, and as the tech continues to mature rapidly, many of the concerns of integrating UAV into civilian airspace will be addressed in short time. The apparent value in these systems has given birth to thousands of companies focused on solving these issues, many of which attract some serious investment and employ resources from some of the top tech universities in the country. I absolutely applaud Rhode Island's effort to stay ahead of the technology. I suggest we support the responsible use of the UAV in the state, and I want to stress the opportunity to support growth of a new high-tech industry ripe for innovation and full of potential. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trench. Are there any questions? No? Thank you very much. Randall Rose from the Rhode Island Coalition to Defend Human and Civil Rights.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Let me just give you some. Here is my talking points over here. Before I begin, I just want to ask, in one of the previous committee meetings, because I've been at every one of the commission hearings, it was said that there would be testimony from the Rhode Island Attorney General or law enforcement. Is that going to happen?
Typically, we don't take questions from the people who are presenting, but no, today's the last day, and the Attorney General, we've changed the format, and the Attorney General's office won't be speaking. They're part of the commission, so the Attorney General and law enforcement won't be here. Obviously, it was open to anyone who wanted to come, so they won't be.
Okay. Well, I as a privacy advocate, I often have on previous issues responded to the Attorney General's office's testimony to make sure there's a balance, and I'm disappointed there isn't an opportunity to do that because there are no privacy advocates on the commission. There's just government people, and a few drone advocates. But I do want to let me just go straight to my testimony. So I want to be clear that the Rhode Island Coalition to Defend Human and Civil Rights does not oppose drones in general. We believe drones do have a lot of legitimate uses. We would like to see a drone industry developing in this state. But drones are also very controversial for good reason. They have capabilities nowadays that go far beyond what the model aircraft that people used for fun a generation ago. They often carry cameras. They can capture not just pictures, but infrared images, all sorts of wireless signals, audio conversations. And because drones are so cheap and so portable and so hard to detect, they are becoming very practical as an unprecedented, easily accessible means of large-scale surveillance of people or small-scale surveillance if somebody private wants to use a drone to spy on people he knows or people he doesn't know. So also drones can easily carry weapons and do damage, and in many ways insufficiently regulated drones could seriously worsen our quality of life. So we expect there will be laws passed on keeping drones safe, because that should be a no-brainer, but safety itself is not enough. The real debate on drones is between the people who wish to allow drones to invade privacy in ways that weren't practical in the past, and people who wish to take effective steps to preserve the level of privacy that many of us have always expected. So it's no coincidence that many states have been, and many localities have been passing drone laws, and in general these laws have been aimed at preserving privacy. This is a new area of law. The laws none of the laws are perfect at this point. A lot of them don't go far enough, but it is important to make effective laws to preserve privacy, and drone privacy laws are needed in two areas. Protection against government invading our privacy, and B, protections against companies and individuals protecting our privacy. It's not a choice between those two things, because those are both serious concerns. Often I hear people, in issues of privacy, I hear people from government saying, well, the real problem about privacy is from shady businesses. And then I hear people from business saying, well, the real problem about privacy is a threat from government. I don't think it makes sense to pass the buck like that. It makes more sense to just pass sensible regulations that apply to the concerns on both sides. So for protection about government invasion of privacy, I understand Hillary Davis gave you a copy of the bill that was introduced in the past, 7170, so you have a copy of that. I'll just be brief and say that does cover most of what's needed as far as government invasion of privacy goes. It's very good. I wouldn't want to see a weaker version than that. But there's one problem with it, which is what's often neglected in Rhode Island law. When government operates a drone, the government doesn't manufacture the drone. It doesn't own the drone software. So drone manufacturers or providers of drone software also have access to whatever data is captured by a government drone. And that needs serious regulation. You need to make sure that when a police department buys a drone from a provider, none of the companies involved or none of the companies further back in the supply chain are selling that data or monetizing it in other ways or finding ways to reconstitute data that's supposed to be anonymized. That needs to be written very carefully because in privacy law, if you don't write the law very carefully, it's very easy to circumvent. And when I've talked to people in municipal government about this, they say, oh yeah, our license plate cameras can actually have data that can be sold. That's a problem. Or when I talk to people who are in the drone industry in Rhode Island about this, they say, yeah, they don't want the companies to be able to sell that kind of information or use it improperly. So that needs to be written very carefully, and we'd be happy to provide draft legislation along those lines. But that's the only gap as far as government regulation of government use of drones is concerned. That's the only major gap in the bill that the ACLU gave to you. Moving on to private use of drones. A lot of the issues there apply actually for government and non-government use of drones. The main point is that the drone should not get or transmit personally identifiable information. And when I say personally identifiable information, I don't want that defined in a cheap way. I want...
Mr. Rose, that's 5, but I'll give you a couple more minutes to wrap up. That's
okay,
5 minutes. So a couple more minutes. Thank you.
Okay. Any information that can be traced back to the person or re-identifiable information that combined with other databases can be used to generate a profile of the person. So it's important to cover both of those. That's something that's often neglected in law. Unless required in an emergency, there should be a ban on that. Also, drones should not disturb others due to noise or other means or gather information about what's inside a person's residence. And some jurisdictions have successfully passed laws at the state and local level banning drones from flying over an individual's property without permission. I know the FAA may not be happy with that, but states and localities have successfully passed those laws. I don't think the FAA has firm law behind it, and I don't think the FAA has public opinion behind it either. I think the state and local laws banning people from drones from flying over someone's property without permission are on a sound footing both legally and politically. On safety, the single most important issue on safety is weaponized drones. There should be an absolute ban on drones having weapons or any other device that causes pain or injury. So I don't want to get into debates about whether a taser or pepper spray is a weapon or whether a paintball gun, which one individual did a do-it-yourself project and put a paintball gun on a drone. I don't want to get into a debate on whether that's a weapon, but any device that can cause pain or injury, there should be an absolute ban on putting it on drones. We know what drones are like in a war zone. That should not be what Rhode Islanders have to live through. It's just one of the many ways that badly regulated drones can harm our quality of life. Finally, information transmitted from drones should be encrypted, and we can have a waiting period to allow the manufacturers some time to build that in. But after 2019, the information transmitted from drones should be encrypted to prevent unauthorized people from accessing the drone data. Because it's not enough to have vague or weak references to privacy in the law. You have to write it very carefully. And cities and towns should be able to write their own regulations on drones, because some of the concerns are specific to some areas. You don't have the kind of issue of drones in rural areas. Drones can be used for crop surveillance or search and rescue. There are different issues in different localities, and a law that prevents cities and towns from regulating drones and only has weak privacy protections is worse than nothing. So thank you.
Mr. Rose, we good?
Yes, I'm done.
Perfect. Are there any questions? Thank you. You gave us a lot of very good information, so thank you. Yes.
Randall, I'm sorry that we are not testifying, so we couldn't do our general tip for tat, but I do want to assure you that the Attorney General, as a part of this commission and separately and individually, his biggest concerns about drone use is the privacy of our citizens, whether it is in government interference within the confines of the Fourth Amendment or it is a crime victim being harassed or stalked. So please keep in mind that we are very concerned about that issue. We might not agree on how to deal with it, but it is our concern as well. But thank you for being here today.
Are there any other further questions? No? Thank you very much. Judith Dixon from the Rhode Island Coalition to Defend Human and Civil Rights. Oh. Is there anyone else who did not, who's come in who would like to testify? Yes. Oh, you signed in? Okay, that's fine. Thank you. If you could just just sign in and then just tell us your name and. Actually, you're right. She won't be back in. That's okay. Thank you and welcome. Could you use? I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you. Okay. We did discuss this at a recent meeting, and one of our members raised some issues about safety that I'm concerned with. I think Randall covered the privacy issues very well. But Liberty Goodman is not here today, but she was saying, how are they going to regulate these unmanned things flying around the air like we regulate car traffic with stop signs, stoplights, and many laws? And perhaps technologically that has been answered, but it seems to me that there are a lot of still unanswered questions. If a drone flies over your house, assuming that that's a law that passes without your permission or knowledge, and it crashes into your window by mistake, then there's a liability issue. Just like a car does damage, there's a liability issue, and there's a license so that the police can trace the owner of the vehicle. If in fact it's a hit and run, the license is clear on the car, and passers-by can call that into the police. But a drone is so small, I mean, I think that there should be license. They should be licensed to fly, and I know Hillary was saying maybe they should have a permission to fly. And would they file a flight plan like an airplane? Because otherwise they can do a lot of damage and no one knows who did it if they don't own up to it, which I suspect some people might not. And finally, the worst scenario is that they could fly into they could disregard the law about being close to an airport and fly into a commercial jetliner. And again, who would know for sure who was operating the drone that did that, which raises terrorist questions also, but just assuming it's somebody who was flying it by mistake and that happened. So I think that at the moment I'm kind of anti-drone because I don't see how all of those questions about identifying the ones who are flying them have been answered. But there's a lot I don't know about it, so thank you for listening.
Thank you. Are there any questions? No, but I do think you hit upon, in the people that I talk to, and I've said this over and over again, I think the technology will get there that will be able to identify who they are. And you're right, that seems to be one of the most unnerving things about the new technology is if your insurance company is coming to view your roof and you know it's them and you can identify it, or if there's some way via an app to know whose drone, it suddenly will ease the tension. But if something comes by, it's a little unnerving. So, in the technology is getting there, as Mr. Argenio said, with some of the things that are being put into them to be able to track where they are, where they go, all of that, it will catch up. But your points are well taken. Is there anyone else who would like to testify who is not signed up and would like to? I'm very sorry. Please come forward.
Better known as Pat Fonts.
Okay, can you just press the button to make sure it's... It's up. If the button is up. Thank
Okay.
you.
My name is Patricia Fonts. I'm better known as Pat Fonts, and I'm here representing Occupy Providence, which means I'm speaking for the poorest elements of our community against those who can afford to buy toys like drones. I was alarmed years ago when I heard that people were riding their yachts around Chesapeake Bay with bumper stickers on the back that said, "He who dies with the most toys wins." And it has become increasingly the philosophy of life in America. The more stuff you can acquire, the better off you are. And I think that this is a prime example of a toy taking over, a toy that some people can buy when some people don't have homes, food, good public schools. We can't run the buses correctly, and yet people have money to buy toys, drones. So from the point of view of conspicuous consumption, when we are living in the age of climate crisis, when we are living in the age of we are going to face the end of resources on the planet, is letting well-off people ride their drones through the sky and use fuel to do it a sensible thing to do. So that's my first objection to the whole idea that people need drones. Children could walk around, hike, play baseball, and they don't need to have fueled drones that they're using for play. So the idea of the drone as toy. Secondly, the military connection between it. You know, up until now, we've heard about people who are living in war countries, and these drones are flying over. And maybe we have a modicum of sympathy for them, and we say, yes, it must be terrible to have these things buzzing overhead. But within a few years, we'll be so used to the fact that we have these things buzzing overhead that we'll think, oh, there's nothing to it. There's nothing to worry about having drones buzzing overhead, and people will be being killed, and children will be playing with toys. A drone, sure, it's a game, it's a toy, forgetting that it's killing people. So I'm anti-drone way more fundamentally than the question of regulation. But let's move to the question of regulation. On the question of regulation, I think, once again, who's going to pay for this regulation? I mean, everyone is stressing how complicated it's going to be, how difficult it's going to be. Someone is going to have to be paid to do these things, write the laws, monitor the fulfillment of the laws. Am I going to pay taxes for somebody else's hobby? Yes, I will, no doubt, pay the taxes for somebody else's hobby. If a person has as a hobby something that endangers or inconveniences, it seems to me there should be a fee method to make sure that they pay for the damages or potential damages that are done, and not the ordinary old citizen. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about is the differentiation of regulation in rural and urban areas in the state. There has been talk about taking away from towns or cities the right to make their own regulations, and I would like to speak against that. I live in South County. I live in a wooded area. We value in that area our privacy. We have bought big tracts of land, not necessarily for conspicuous consumption. I own 10 acres of woods and 2 acres of a house lot. I use that wood to heat my home. I'm fanatic about low footprint energy efficiency. And the notion, I'm going to admit it. Sometimes if I have to run outside in my underwear, I can do it because nobody sees me. No one sees my home. I can go out scantily clad. I have gone out unclad to lie in the sun. And the notion that somebody is going to run over my property with a drone and possibly take photographs, boy, I mean, let me tell you, they wouldn't sell them to any men's magazine, that's for sure. But just the same, it is my property, it is my body, and I don't see that anybody has a right to fly something over it and potentially take pictures, which were the whole reason for my buying that property, the whole thing I value about my way of life. And then my bird watching. All right, so they have a hobby. Mine costs a bag of seeds a month. And this drone is going to zoop over my property and, destroy my list of birds that I've managed to attract to my... Come on, one man's hobby is another lady's pain in the butt. So I'm advocating for strong controls, and I'm recognizing that those controls are going to cost money. And I'm resentful that that money is spent for the vacant pleasure of people who take pleasure in being able to buzz and make noise and zap. And, I think they'd all be much better off if they took a nature-friendly hobby instead of that one. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Fontes. Are there any questions? Well, I have to admit, in my 12 years, never ceases to amaze me the testimony that we get. So thank you very much. Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to? Not that anyone can top that. Is there anyone who would like to come forward to testify? No. Well, I want to thank you all. Is there anyone on the panel who would like to say anything? Yes, Vice Chairman Corvesi.
Mr. Chairman, as you know, today we were taking testimony from the public, and I did have a number of general comments given to me by a number of constituents, some of which are basically covered by federal regulations presently, but some, again, in a more broader sense, may be incorporated in some of the language of the legislation we hope to pass, but in no particular order. Among some of the ideas or suggestions that were given to me by my constituents who knew I was on this committee, talking about penalties if drones were used for harm or injury, restricting their use around airways, travel roads, highly populated areas, talking about a designated area for hobbyists similar to a golf or gun range, an age limit for the use of drones, 12 years or older, unless accompanied by an adult, and of course the perpetual question of license and registration. So those were some of the broader topics and subjects that were brought up to me by my constituents, and I told them that I would bring it here.
Okay. Thank you. Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say that, so I had two groups of constituents really reached out to me on this. One group of constituents came to me after the monk on the top of the wind turbine at Portsmouth Abbey was videoed over the summer by a drone. And it was great video, but a lot of people, I think, rightfully came to me with some serious concerns. And I hadn't thought of that until I saw the video, and I said, he's just trying to relax on the top of a wind turbine. I guess you want to be private. Why should someone else be videoing him? And then I've also heard from quite a few people, more so than I ever thought, really used drones recreationally. And you can really tell it's a very popular hobby, and it's getting more popular because they came to me after that and they said, don't overreact, don't prohibit us from using them anywhere. And so I certainly hope we can achieve a balance between the recreational use of drones. Certainly if you have private property and you have a lot of property, I think you should, may have been the opposite of your testimony, ma'am, but I think in that case you should be able to use it on your property. And then to your testimony, I think you bring up a very excellent point. If it's not your property, I don't see why you should be operating it at least very close to a residence, certainly using it to spy or take video or photos of someone. So it's a very difficult balancing act, but one that I certainly hope we're going to be able to achieve, and I appreciate the testimony people today and the interest groups that have come before us, and hopefully we can craft some sort of set of regulations that'll work for as many people as possible.
Thank you, Representative. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Yes, Mr. McMahon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I represent the commercial UAS industry, and here in Rhode Island, there's potential to be thousands of jobs created and millions of dollars in economic impact from the commercial UAS industry. It truly is the next chapter of aviation. Our association did a study last year when the FAA had reached its first 1,000 exemptions for UAS and using UAS commercially, and found that 25 different industries are using UAS. And different types of applications, such as doing things like utility inspection, construction monitoring, Also doing things like agriculture and checking farmland to see how the health of the crops are or what type of fertilization they need or irrigation that they need. We're seeing it being used in filmmaking, in news gathering, just all sorts of industries are using UAS. And so what we'd like to see is that balance of the concerns that many people have today, having those being addressed, but also having legislation here at Rhode Island not to be so restrictive to hamper the growth of this industry in the state.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else? No? Well, I'd like to take everyone, to thank everyone for taking the time to participate in the commission. We will be assembling everyone's thoughts, all the testimony, the different material that we've received over the last several months, putting that into a report, and then fashioning some legislation based on the outcome of that report. So at this time, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion made and seconded by Representative Kazarian. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you very much. We stand adjourned.